So the following conversation is between me, Jesse McCarthy with MontessoriEducation.com, and Simone Davies of the MontessoriNotebook.com. Simone and I sat down one Saturday morning over Skype and just asked each other a few challenging questions around teaching and parenting, what we thought of as kind of gray areas in Montessori. Now, in this first clip, and there will be 5 in total, we talk about topics such as following the child, setting limits, and when is it fitting to correct.
Okay, so Jesse, how much do you think that we should let the child lead when choosing their activities versus giving them formal presentations, even like at home, showing them how an activity works?
Okay. Yeah, and I'm actually really excited to hear your answer on this, particularly in the toddler environment, because that experience, I'm very curious about how different Montessorians approach this. For myself, I think I'm going to talk the most broad, and I would say I think of it as a combination of always keeping in mind like the long range goal of aiding this child towards independence and their own personal self, and also with the enjoyment in the moment. So in answering this question, like letting a child kind of choose activities versus I'm going to give him a formal presentation, I think it's really dangerous when the formal presentations become like, now it's learning time and it's this educational moment, when in life, like it's not really how things work. Like this is educational time. I think it all should be kind of one, that we're just living life. And here's something that's really curious. It's like if we were out there, roaming around in the forest, just, cruising around, looking at things. We go, oh, look at that tree. I wonder what that's all about. And then we just start looking at the tree. Now, is that a formal presentation? So in Montessori, I think sometimes we can get stuck in these kind of, okay, now it's work time. And now it's the child just kind of doing his thing. When I think of it all as one. So that's kind of the backdrop on my end, the way I approach it. So maybe just throw that back at you. What do you think of that in relation to this question?
Yeah, I think that it's true that sometimes we think this is a learning moment and then the rest is not. And then as you become a Montessori trained teacher or you become a more Montessori parent, you realize that you don't just finish school and stop learning. You are learning through everything and through every conversation. So I think you're totally right about that. And I think the thing that I find interesting about this question is that when I did my Montessori training, we have very formal presentations that we learn. And we practiced them so well that I thought that when I had a real child in front of me, they would watch my full presentation of the hand washing activity. And then actually in real life, the more now I've been working in a Montessori classroom for 15 years, and I realized that actually when I follow the child and the child's interest, which is what Montessori is about, then I'm more likely to engage. So rather than having a plan, which is actually top-down learning, like I want to give this child this lesson about this thing right now, but it's not related to what they're doing, which is particularly relevant for a toddler who lives in right that moment, then I find that the learning becomes much more natural and is much more effective than me coming up to a child going, oh, I want to show you the scissor cutting activity. And then 50% of the time they just walk away because that's not what's really engaging them right now. So how I'm working in the classroom a lot at the moment is a child goes over to, say, the coin box, and they're trying to get the coin in. And I just keep observing to see how they're going. And maybe when they get stuck because all the coins are inside the box and they can't get the lock open, then I might say, oh, would you like some help? Look, and show them how the coin box opens, and then step back and see how they continue on. And so then I'm really just supporting, following their interest, and then step back to see how they get on. And what I'm also seeing is because we've got mixed age groups in a Montessori classroom, there's so much informal lessons, presentations being going on by the younger children watching the older children. Like this is just what I find so much. So particularly in a toddler classroom, it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal presentation by an adult. It can be an older child working with material, and that's how then you'll see a younger child go up and give it a try. What I do really like, though, is say you've seen a child coming to class and they're really struggling with their zipper, on their jacket, and then you say, oh, you know what, in the classroom I have like a dressing frame and we could practice that together. Then I still think you're following the child because you see that they're interested, they need some practice with it, and you can use that kind of thing to give a formal presentation.
Yeah, I really like a few of the things you've pointed out, and I want to hop on a couple because first the idea of like when you were trained, you got these formal presentations. So like Simone, I was trained too. I was trained primary 3 to 6. I wasn't in the classroom teaching for years as Simone was doing, but it's funny because the training you have these very formal presentations. You're either acting as the child yourself with another adult or, an adult and you are acting as the child. And man, like you have this sense that, oh, when I get out of here, then I could just present these and the child will sit there and listen and everything's going to be beautiful. And that's just not the reality. So that's one thing I thought was cool, what you were saying. And then the second thing is, yeah, so the lessons, what I like about Montessori trainings, and I know you were in AMI, Simone?
That's
okay,
right.
So
yeah.
I was trained AMI too, and I don't have this breadth of knowledge of sitting in on AMS and all these other ones, but I'll just speak broadly and consider that this is how it's done in other places. But when you're given these formal lessons, you really learn through and through what the lesson is, what its purpose is, how to give it, like in this quote ideal state when the child's just sitting there. So I think that's hugely important to know what the presentations are and really understand their value, both in the moment, philosophically, long range. But then as Simone, as you're saying, which is just so cool to get these kind of concrete examples of it, is like in the actual moment, you don't go in and go, now I'm going to give you a zipper lesson. Like it comes naturally. And this is why I think this, when do you let the child choose activities versus giving presentation? There might be something off about the way we're thinking about that question, because it all integrates in the end. So I just appreciate the way that you had kind of like phrased that and gave a few examples of how that works, like realistically in the classroom. You're still giving presentations. It's just not this, now we sit down and formalize everything,
Yeah.
So.
And I like actually that we know the presentation so well, so you can actually improvise with a real child,
Yes.
So if I'm giving a language lesson and someone, is just putting it in their mouth, I can say, oh, that's the shark, and give them the names of it, even if I'm not, first touching it and feeling around it like I would in my formal presentation and that kind of thing.
And I wonder, Simone, and this is a big thing that comes up, and I deal a lot with this when working with teachers, is the early teachers that don't yet have that kind of, it hasn't become ingrained in their own minds. So it's so much extra work. And I think there's a way in which it's easier to just say, well, I'm going to give this presentation now, because it's hard to hold all of those presentations that you just learned as a teacher. Or if you're a parent, I mean, my God, there's so many things running around in your head and it's like, what do I do now? So, as you get more and more experience in the classroom as a veteran, as you were just saying, like it just comes up naturally and you can integrate it. But I think it's going to be much more challenging for new parents, new teachers to not have it feel a little bit more formal. Would you agree with that? Or?
Yeah, and the other thing that I think is really difficult for parents especially and for teachers is to trust that the child is going to get to all areas of the classroom or all activities, or to learn to read, or to learn to write, or to learn to run, or to walk, because, it takes a lot of trust to step back and follow the child. And I think another thing that we sometimes misunderstand when we use this word follow the child is that the child can do whatever they want, which maybe leads into the whole setting limits. So actually, if the child crosses a boundary for myself, for themselves, or for the environment, or for someone else, then I'm going to step in and set a kind and clear limit. So I think people who say, oh, we followed the child, so we just let them do whatever they like, they've also misunderstood a little bit as well.
So I think I'm happy you just said that. And I think that will go into a question that I have for you here. So when do you step in to stop or correct a child? So I know that's for me, it seems very specific at times, but are there any kind of more generalized ideas around this that come to mind for you?
Well, yeah, to me, that is the rule that I use in my own head, because I like to kind of have some guidelines for myself. So if they're exploring, for example, using a watering can instead of watering a plant, and they're filling up a bucket with it, I could make a mental note thinking, okay, well, the child's concentrating right now. They're exploring how they're using and pouring, and they're not hurting themselves. They're not hurting someone else or myself or the environment. So I'm going to let them continue with that. But when they start using a glass and banging it on a window, then that's not going to be okay. So could break. So they could hurt themselves. And so then I'll show them, oh, this is a glass, it's for drinking. Are you thirsty, or should we find something else to use to clean the window with, or whatever they're, trying to get at. So it's usually for me that very clear boundary. Like I want to preserve their concentration as much as possible. And as a young teacher, I was definitely like, well, the watering can's for watering plants, I better go and correct them, And then actually remembering this phrase that we have in Montessori, which is teach by teaching, not by correcting. And I find that really, really important to remember. Is like, actually, how can I make a mental note and show them next time they come over to the the watering can, or maybe they go and refill the watering can, and I could say, oh, would you like to use that to water the plants now, or are you still finishing it? So I can also invite an opportunity to show them how a watering can would be used at another time. It's like finding more a neutral moment.
Yeah. And so in thinking about this, like just practically what this might look like is if a child is, holding something the wrong way, we don't stop him and say, well, now we need to hold it the right way and then like manipulate his hands. But the next day we might have an opportunity to just be, holding something the right way and know that he's seeing us do it or giving a lesson. So in a way we're quote correcting, but it's not really the traditional view of how you correct somebody and go, wait, you're not really doing it properly. You just re-show it another day and they absorb what you did. Right.
Yeah. And like say a child slams a door, for example, when they come home, you could go in and say, we don't slam the door, and give them this whole like rant at that moment. Right, yeah. Or you can make that mental note to think, okay, I really want them to close the door in a more safe way. And so again, I kind of just wait till it's a neutral moment. It could be even the next day or later that afternoon, like, oh, I just wanted to show you something about the door. I noticed when you closed it earlier, I was worried about your fingers. Look. And then like really overemphasize, you can't see me right now, but I'm quite modeling closing a door really quietly.
Maybe
that doesn't work so well on audio, does it?
Well, it's funny. We've got ourselves on video, so who knows? If it works out, we've got a video too, Simone, so you're good. Simone is closing a door, people that are listening on audio only. But Simone, so I'm curious. It was such a sea change for me, this correcting point, because I was, started out in relatively traditional schooling, and man, there was red all over the papers. I actually ended up switching like a year later to blue, but there was blue writing all over the papers. This was with older children, like 4th through 8th grade. I thought that was my big move. I'm going to go from red to blue all over their papers, the editing. But this idea of not correcting in the moment, and I think of it as not correcting in the moment because you are somewhat correcting. It's just in a different way. Because by like you, Simone, by saying that later, this is how I close the door. In a way, like we got to be honest with ourselves. We're trying to change a child's behavior, or at least help them to change the way that they act. But there is a difference between like you had said, like, oh, if you slam the door and it gets in somebody's, fingers. Like I remember as a kid, it's crazy. I slammed a glass door by accident, and literally a young girl, her finger got caught in there. She had to rush the hospital. It was horrible. And I have this vivid image. So accidents obviously are going to happen, but those seriously dangerous things in your house or in the classroom, like a kid goes over and literally decides, I'm angry at another child, I'm going to punch him. In the moment, we have to respond. So where do you draw a line between like responding in the moment and not? You might have some kids.
Yeah, that's okay. Hi kids, that's real life. Correcting, I definitely step in to set a limit when there's safety at stake. So if two children are hurting each other, then for me it's super clear. With siblings, for example, I almost have in my head like a thermometer. So like if it's low level bickering, I kind of like, okay, they can just see that I'm standing here and observing them, but I'm just seeing how the situation is. They know that an adult's around, but I'm not actually going to interfere. This is just, some negotiation skills being learned right now. And then it might escalate where I might need to say, oh, I can see you two are play fighting. Are you guys both having fun? Or we had a rule in our house, which was rough play by mutual consent. And so I might say, does someone need to say stop right now, so that they would stop fighting. And we never had any problem about that. So that's like when it escalates. And then if two kids are really going to hurt each other, then I'm like, I can't let you hurt each other. We're going to keep each other safe. And you go here and you go here. And with young children, I'd just be standing between them, on the couch. And other older children might want to take it outside or go to their rooms or whatever, but it's not in a punishment way. It's just keeping them safe. So I have no problem with setting a limit, and that's different to, correcting, or it's just everyone calm down and then you can come back and solve the problem,
and
make amends basically.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about like how to treat it as you've got some principles behind you, but then you adapt based on the situation. So I even like what you're saying, because siblings is often, this always comes up with siblings. Not always, I shouldn't say. There's some siblings just love each other and everything's beautiful all the time, but that's the rarity, right? But with siblings, you're going to have like literal fights, and then you're going to have like roughhousing. Like that is just the way life is. And it's difficult for me because in schooling, it's just, it's almost like you can't have any of that at school. And I know home and school is different, but I wonder how much culturally do you think we've gone too far with not allowing that at school? Because I mean, I think if you're a teacher today, if you're working with any children of, I don't know what age, but let's say 2 and above, at some point on the playground or outside, if they're outdoors, they like to rough around. Like that's what a lot of children do. But we have to constantly be on them at least at school because of, you can't push people, you can't shove. But I like what you were saying about you had this rough housing rule. Is everybody okay with this thing? What do you think about that in school?
Yeah, so for me, I've never really seen children in my class under 4, rough playing with someone. Sometimes they want to cuddle another child, and then I'm kind of there to like translate for both children because I have mostly children who are quite not very articulate under 4. So to just say, oh, he really wants to give you a hug, and do you want to have a hug too? Just to check that everyone's enjoying it, particularly when I'm looking at the body language and they're not enjoying it and it looks like they really would like some help to get out of that situation.
So maybe
I think that
I think it's age.
Like rough play. Yeah, I think it could be age, but I also think having some guidelines, like you said, guidelines, I think what work for me is like this rough play by mutual consent, is that maybe there is a way that children can be a little bit kind of bouncy with each other, even in a school place, but there is that very clear, like teaching them about consent. And I think that's really valid.
Yeah. So I think maybe getting into that, what does consent mean? Are we both enjoying this? And yeah, I don't tend to see like two-year-olds like rolling around wrestling. But man, once you get to like 4.5, 5, and then into early elementary, I mean, that's huge, So, and it's boys and girls. I mean, oftentimes it's more boys, but I've seen girls, rock and roll and just roll around with guys. So, but it's just a different thing at home versus school. And I'm just wondering, if the reality is you can allow more at home with your own children than what you can at school. And that's just the reality.
And what we found, which is really interesting, was about the languaging of how you stop somebody, because if they were kind of like tickling each other and they go, no, it's really hard to hear that no as clear. So we came up with the word that stop was when they really weren't enjoying it. And what I often heard is someone was trying to say stop. I said, and then I could actually be another voice like, oh, I heard someone say stop right now. And that was enough to break up whatever was going on.
Yeah, I think
does that make sense?
Yeah, and I like that because I think the word no, I mean, clearly you're working with toddlers, so no just becomes this amazing word. I can use it at any moment. But I like that you're replacing it with this is, I wouldn't say like an emergency word, but it's one word that clearly means I'm not playing around. Like this isn't about me being tickled. This isn't about me just being, no. This is stop, and then they treat it seriously. They treat that word significantly.
And then also I have also given like my kids the word, like they're rough playing and I'm hearing someone actually not enjoying it. And then I'm saying, does someone need to say stop now? And then they've remembered, oh yeah, stop. So in that moment, they've also kind of forgotten what they need to say. Yeah. So then you're giving them a tool. Yeah.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be great? We need this tool for adults as well, don't we? I mean, it's like,
basically they become adults.
Yeah. I know. So